Gerry Goldstein, how does a kid from a nice Jewish family end up in San Antonio, Texas?
Well, actually, Richard, while I wasn't born here, it was part of that great generation's entry into World War II. I was at the latter end. My dad was stationed in Santa Maria, California in the Army Air Corps, and I was born there, but my family is from San Antonio. My dad's grandfather was the first rabbi here, Rabbi Solomon, who Warren Maverick once pointed out, they obviously liked him so much, they liked New York, they named him twice. So I grew up about a block from where I live now, down the King William Historic District.
I know also as a child of the 60s that you tell us a little bit about your undergraduate life.
My dad described it as a matriculation rather than paying for an education. I was accepted at Brown in Providence, Rhode Island, and at Tulane in New Orleans, and I took a look at Providence and New Orleans and opted for the latter. I spent 4 glorious years living in the French Quarter. I don't recall much about those early years.
Then you clearly lived in the 60s.
I did. They do say if you remember them, you weren't there.
Yes. Did anything change when you went off to law school?
Things changed dramatically after I got to law school. When I was in undergraduate school, 60 to 65, we were just starting to push into Vietnam with the advisors. By my second year in law school, the war in Vietnam was raging. We were rioting in the streets. My last year in law school, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King were both assassinated. Law school didn't have an attendance requirement, which I was very lucky about. I can also say that after serving on the faculty duty for 15 years, they don't look at your transcript before they hire faculty.
Clearly.
But it was a different time and a different place, as E. Cummings said. There was I think most of us had grown up listening to our parents talk about the Depression and the Great War. We sort of had it easy compared to what they had gone through. So we voluntarily, I think, jumped into hippiedom with both feet. I think the draft, Warren Maverick, who I practiced with early in my legal career, used to say that I misunderstood my mission, and that had it not been for the draft, I was sitting on my conscience in the 60s. I would have remained indifferent, but when someone gives you a letter and says your turn to go out and kill or be killed, I suddenly found my conscience. Even in undergraduate school, I was in Louisiana. The freedom marches were going on, the freedom riders and buses. I actually rode a bus from Louisiana into Mississippi and sat in on some of the lunch counters. Goldberg and Schwerner were killed while I was in college very nearby where I was. New Orleans didn't have public schools as much as they had parochial schools. The Catholic schools provided the basic primary public education there, in essence. And the Archbishop decided to integrate those schools the year I got there in '61. And there was
I'm sure that went smoothly.
It did not, as one might expect. And I remember I got a nice note from Chet Storch, who had been a senior at Little Rock Central High School and was in my class at Tulane. I remember how lucky he was. He didn't have to go to school in his last year because if you recall, they had shut it down.
It's kind of a personal aside. Why don't you tell us how you met your wife, as long as we're back in those days?
They were glorious days. It was 1969, a wonderful year. I met my bride of almost 39 years now. As I mentioned, the Vietnam War was raging, rioting in the streets, civil rights, civil liberties, free speech, free love were blossoming from their flower-like abode. It was a wonderful time. Chris and I bought a Volkswagen bus shortly after we came back from traveling around Europe and Morocco on what little money I had saved up. We had enough left to buy a Volkswagen bus. We pulled the seats out, put a Persian carpet in it, put tools around Ramsey Clark for president sticker on the back, and got run out of more counties in South Texas, and we were invited back.
And also tell us a little bit about Matthew.
After 22 years of marriage, we were blessed with young Matthew, who's now 18 years old. He is delightful. We had decided to at least spend the majority of our time in Colorado, and Matthew has grown up in the mountains. I learned the 3 most dangerous words in skiing several years ago on a heli trip, heli skiing with my son, and those are "follow me, Dad." He's been the light of our life. It has made a substantial difference in my life. People tell you, when you have a kid, it's going to change your life, and it's quote on, okay, right? I listen. He's, I thought the way to get something from my parents was to yell at them. These kids are so much more intuitive and so much more intelligent, so much more sensitive. He can suck just about anything else. That's what I give him the other day. And he, I'm hoping he'll go into an honest profession like becoming forest ranger or something. He's good for society, but he's
kind of reverse the karma.
I was hoping so. I promised Christine 39 years ago I wouldn't die a lawyer, and I would have an honest profession at some point. So I'm working.
Well, we're interested to see the progression then. You came from a lawyer family. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your dad and starting up the firm and about that time?
Almost 70 years ago, my dad started a law firm with a college and law school friend of his, Jason Levy. And Levy and Goldstein is in the same building that we still occupy today. They were primarily a corporate oil and gas type firm. When I didn't really want to be a lawyer. As I said, it was a way out of the draft for me, at least law school was. And when I got out, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And it was easy. I was lucky. I had a secretary in the office. And I was doing corporate work for about 6 months until I met Christine. And I still remember going to the airport, meeting my parents who had been in Asia. I said, Dad, I met someone. I'm going to see them. So where are you going? I said, well, go to Europe. She lives there. We're going to travel around. And my dad said, well, when are you coming back? I said, well, I'm not really sure. And he said, well, you might not have a job when you get back. I said, well, I figured that. And we spent 3 months of that summer traveling together. And when I came back, fathers being fathers, like I hope I am with my son, of course I had a job. And I had a place to roost, and I had a secretary, and I didn't have to worry about rent. But I will say we got married that year, and my salary, well, Chris's tuition was half of my salary. So, it wasn't being overpaid, but I did have a nice place to begin my practice.
It's always nice to have the overpaid.
It is, and it gave me an opportunity that I think perhaps many young lawyers don't have. Maury Maverick, Maverick family had been an old friend of my family. My great aunt was Maury Sr.'s secretary when he was in Congress. And then Maury Jr. always said that Aunt Rose was like Tabasco sauce, a little bit goes a long way. But Maury was trying drafting sister cases representing kids that were getting busted in concerts in their Volkswagen buses. And it fit very neatly in with my politics and what I thought was my mission in life. And I will say that I have had an enormous amount of fun and I think enjoyed a great deal of satisfaction in both myself and my profession. I think, Richard, what you do is in the best tradition of our profession, particularly in what you have done in the later part of your life. This is about you and me. I think all of us in the criminal defense bar look up to those who sacrifice profit for principle, and I think you've done that. And I think to some extent, back in the 60s, that's what we were about. I may have gone astray, reading avarice, a bit hard, and probably took hold of me, but it's been a wonderful trip. I mean, practicing criminal law is like theater. It's rewarding not only in a hedonistic way in the moment, but it's fun. I always win the cases when I retell them. They get better with age, like wine. And that's not to say it's not fun while we're there. And I honestly think most of us are sick enough, and so maybe there's a little bit of anarchy in all of us. We really do enjoy holding the system to its obligations, and I think that's what I think all of us wake up every morning and I actually thank God that I'm doing what I'm doing. I tease about not wanting to die a lawyer, but I'm not sure I could stand it, waking up and not having the opportunity to look forward to another day with another issue in another court in another place. I think it's what keeps us going.
For most of us who observe Gerry Goldstein, is kind of like, I'll just speak for myself, it's kind of like the ancient gods that emerge as adults from the womb. It just seems like you've always been kind of at the forefront of criminal defense law. And I know that you just mentioned part of it.
How much did I pay you for that?
I know that you've already mentioned part of it, but I'd like you to expand a little bit on this about what it was like apprenticing in the law with Maury Maverick.
Maury was remarkable. He always chided me and said, you know, how do you represent criminals whose crimes you don't agree with? Maury really was a man of principle, and I always told him the reason I do this is because none of those people want to have lunch with me. That's changed. Now these white-collar folks do want to have lunch with us. They want to take us to their country club. They wouldn't have us as a member. They want us to agree with their politics, and it's not quite as much fun, although they're the new pariahs. The corporate executives are the new drug dealers. They're getting phenomenal sentences, and they're the targets of most people's venom and animosity. But Maury had a keen sense of righteousness. He taught me the essence of how we treat the least of us is how ultimately we can expect to be treated ourselves. He really did have that classic old-time Texas sense of righteousness and indignation at wrongs. He came out of that. His dad was in Congress, was in FDR's cabinet. That Yarborough liberalism that was they were pluralists. They really believed in what is good for the most of us is good for each one of us, and it was fun. You know, Maury got me involved in all sorts of fascinating cases, from suing school districts to get students who were publishing underground newspapers back into school in their senior year, to representing a high school dropout that went to the Texas Employment Commission, got a job at the Fiesta Theater showing Deep Throat. And Maury had a great sense of humor. He felt good about what he did. And I think that's, you know, if we wake up in the morning, look in the mirror and say, I've done right, we've accomplished something. Maury had a great sense of humor.
I and my friends, the lawyers that I respect, you very much among them, have a definition called a real lawyer. A real lawyer is someone who, in our opinion, not only knows how to try a case, but knows how to appeal a case, and does an outstanding job at both. And your reputation, of course, is both in the trial and the appellate realm. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the most interesting and fulfilling cases you've appealed?
Well, it's always fun to win appeals, so those are the ones you remember. I used to sit on a brag letter.
You won an appeal?
I did. It's been a long time. I have to go way back in the Rolodex. But it is interesting when you think about the cases that stand out in our mind as being important, particularly in trials and appeals. And often, back in the old days, it was our own cases we were appealing, so we had a unfortunate familiarity with the facts of the case. But in terms of, I think the first time you appear in the Supreme Court is one of those, that make your knees weak and your heart race.
They're a lot closer to you than you think.
Well, I think most people think of the Supreme Court in most courts, and you're right. And if you mean the physical
distance, yeah.
It is a very personal experience. You can hear them whispering. You're right there, and it's not a big room. I mean, it's the whole place is very intimate, and you're having an intimate conversation with people that are, for the most part, bright, interested, focused, prepared. And the first case Marty got me involved in was a socialist worker here who is handing out pamphlets on Fort Sam Houston on New Braunfels, which in San Antonio was a main thoroughfare, and it went directly through Fort Sam Houston, which at the time was the 4th Army headquarters, it's now 5th Army. And they had no guard posts, they had no screening. It just had a sign that said, "You're now entering U.S. government territory, you're subject to search and seizure." They had regulations about handing out literature, and they arrested Tom Flower. And we argued this First Amendment case. I still remember the thrill of standing up, and, pulling your chest out, and your shoulders back 2 angles wide, and chin up, and saying, "My name is Gerry Goldstein, and please support." It's like all of a sudden it's, there's a great gap between what you just heard yourself say and what you're about to start. It's like, God, get on with it. But we won the case, and it was a fun case. And I still remember we went back several months later. It didn't take that long. It's not a long opinion. And we met with Tom Flower in the Village in Manhattan. And I can't believe you guys did that. You're scumbags. You're lawyers. You're letting the steam off the system. We'll never have a revolution as long as people like you keep allowing these little squeaky things. You're a part of the machinery that's the cogs that crush the people. It's gratitude for you.
Another lesson learned.
Yes, right. The party did about Hunter Thompson, who I had the pleasure, misfortune to represent a number of times, where he said the most difficult part of every case is the party of interest. And as he was, and Tom Flower was a good example.
Are there other appeals that really, either that are fulfilling or interesting that stick out in your mind?
Yeah, some of them there were a lot in the old days. You'd win appeals,
I remember those days.
I remember that well.
Can't hold on to it.
I still remember there was a period of time when the Fifth Circuit had burned down, and the Fifth Circuit then took over the Louisiana Wildlife Museum, which is now back to its origins as a federal district court, but it's right across from the Royal Orleans in the French Quarter. No air conditioning in those days, so it was triple hung windows were flung up. There were guys shouting vulgarities and prostitutes on the street. The oyster trucks were backing up, picking up, the oysters from Felix's and the Acme Oyster Bar, and people are meandering and screaming out in the streets. And we were arguing a case, and Mari was sitting next to me, and a lawyer from San Antonio, Buddy Benak, was arguing the other side. It was a free speech case, and I remember sitting down after my opening, and naturally we were appealing. The lawyer for the other side, Buddy Benak, got up, and as he did, Judge Goldberg goes, slams his feet together like this, and walks in, and there was no chambers. You were in Louisiana. He walks right by the counsel table and walks out of the room. This is the lawyer about to start his argument. And I looked around at her and I said, "Is that good?" She said, "Yeah, I think that's good." And the opinion came out, and it started off with, the district court has raised a constitutional fossil that has been exhumed and respired to stalk the First Amendment long after it should have been put to rest. And you think, God, those were the days. You knew you had won with the first sentence, but it was like fun reading. What's he going to say about those shits next? And I had fun. But I remember we had a case out of Galveston, that we kind of lost. It was a 100,000-pound marijuana case. It was an offload off a mothership. And this was just one load. And the kids, naturally good planning, had a bunch of 18-wheelers at the Conoco dock there in Galveston, outside of Galveston. And unbeknownst to them, the Christmas party for the Conoco employees was going to be on that dock that night, so that when the boat arrives, there are about 300 people having a Christmas party, including deputy sheriffs and most of the constables in town. And they just rounded up all the usual suspects. In any event, my client was particularly noticeable because he was in a wetsuit, working the offloading operation. Not exactly what most of the party goers were wearing. Well, it was Galveston.
Well, but he was dressed in black.
He was, but it's a black tie. He didn't know me. That's a black one. Quite. Anyway, the jury hung up. It was one of those, you know how it's like, those are the days when you have a full opening. The government would save all their stuff for the rebuttal. You just close on them, and in any event, they put on a very skimpy case in their case in chief. And so when they started retries the next week, that's when, these days, there's a breather, you kind of wait, everybody sits and thinks about it, and you want to do this, right? No, go to trial, Judge Gibson, the federal judge, Galveston, go to trial next week. So
didn't get it right the first time.
But I think you got it down there, Margaret. Anyway, so we're going to trial, and I finally motioned, I said, they didn't put on sufficient evidence. And why am I in worse shape if some of the jurors abide by their oath and won't convict my client? Then if they had convicted my client, I could appeal, and if I went on sufficiency, they can't retry me. Double jeopardy precludes that. Why am I in worse shape because some jurors abide by their oath and won't convict me than I am if they've all folded and convicted me? And I still remember we had an emergency appeal, and Chief Judge Clark was in Jacksonville, Mississippi. This is before, we probably had faxes by then, but that was about it. And so we were in 3 different places. I think Brownsville, Judge Garza, Judge Clark in Jacksonville, and a judge in Houston. And so we had to have lawyers in each place. And we argued in a telephonic conference on this emergency basis. And they stayed the trial. And it ended up going on bonk with the Supreme Court, Becton versus U.S. And we lost the appeal, but it took 3.5 years to get there. And by the time we came back, the prosecutor was in prison, the federal prosecutor, and the judge had passed away. And the spark had come out. The kid got probation, 100,000 pounds of marijuana. I don't think you could get that in the guidelines today. But it was, they were.
I think that's the lower right-hand corner of the guidelines.
Probably, but you know what it's like. Those were the days when y'all lived together. We rented a house in Galveston. All the clients lived with the lawyers, and we made salads in the bottom tray of the ice box. For the hungry hordes. It was fun.
You have had some amazing trials and some amazing clients. You mentioned Hunter Thompson. What are just a couple of the trials and the clients that have just absolutely stick out, either because of their difficulty or because representing them was such a fulfilling moment?
I don't know why the difficult ones seem to come to mind.
Hop right up.
Hunter was a good example. Hunter was not only a client, but he was a friend, and he was somebody. I loved going out to Owl Farm where he lived in Woody Creek because, one night it'd be talking about sports with George Plimpton, and the next night it'd be a new female motorcycle gang from Louisiana. There was something fun always there. But he was not easy on his lawyers. He was a pain in the ass. And he prided himself, as many do, in outlawing, so that you were constantly arguing with the client about every issue. I still remember when we won his first case in Aspen. There was a big pitcher of water, and I look around and Hunter's asleep. The judge is you know, cutting him loose, and he's sleeping. I said, "I'm gonna wake up." The judge tried to, and he picks up the water and pours it on his head. Big pitcher of water. You know, it's up to you. That's interesting. The other case that comes to mind, it was probably because I ran into Craig Washington, a wonderful lawyer, last night at the house. Craig reminded me about this guy. It was a capital case, and I had filed an amicus on behalf of TCLA, complaining that they had never given him a competency. And Samuel Houston Clinton wrote the opinion reversing his capital death penalty conviction. And the client writes a letter to Judge Clinton. I don't need no Jew lawyer with some do-good organization calling me crazy. I ain't crazy. And I don't want to, if I'm going to win, I don't want to win on that. I don't want that, and I don't want any damn here. Clinton writes a second opinion withdrawing his first opinion. And Judge Nowlin in Austin, who I had roomed with briefly when I was a young lawyer, he was in the legislature, and I just left Austin. I was practicing with my dad, as I mentioned. And I didn't want to be in San Antonio on the weekends, and he didn't want to be in Austin on the weekends. So we shared a room until he decided my lifestyle was not befitting the Texas legislature. But anyway, Nowlin appoints me to represent.
Now that the press is
exactly,
more often.
Exactly. Yeah. So Nowlin appoints me to represent this guy, who has said I don't want no Jew lawyer with some do-good organization. And I'm trying to tell him I'm not Jew, I'm Jewish. So the upshot of it was that here I am with some guy that hates me, trying to argue that the guy's crazy. And you know, it was like, if you ever do win, I ever do get out, I'm going to come. You know, it was like, all right, don't put pressure on me. I've got enough problems. You know, just trying to keep pace. But so I got Craig to come in and try to bail me out.
Over the years, you've tried a number of multi-defendant cases. You've tried cases with lots of lawyers. You've tried cases in front of lots of judges. And one of the things that I kind of bemoan is we're losing a little bit of our characters. In fact, we're losing a lot of our characters. Talk a little bit about the lawyers you tried cases with and the judges you tried cases before that you just believe were true characters and just epitomized that era of law at that time.
One comes to mind. Somebody was asking me about it last night. There was a judge out in West Texas, Lucius Bunsen, who was notorious. He would allow you one approach to the witness. He had a squirt gun. He would squirt you in front of the jury. But we were trying a local airplane manufacturer and political activist in a way, a protege of Johnson. Some of the larger-than-life characters in Washington by the name of Marsh Jaffe. And his company, his son, and the lawyer, the general counsel were all indicted on a FECA violation, a federal election code violation, for giving corporate funds to some Democrats in Congress. And they tried to make it a felony by bringing it under the general conspiracy statute, sort of bootstrapping up the punishment. And the government rested the case, and I'm in the bowels of the federal building here, which is an old theater from the Hemisphere. And it's kind of, you're in this curtain little corridor, and Judge Button, I'll go to the bathroom, Judge Button passed me and said, "You gonna put that kid on, right?" This is Judge Jaffe. I said, "Yeah, I had planned to." They have made their case. So I go out and I see Morrison sitting there. Henry B. Gonzalez, who this convention center was named after, whose head was bigger than most people's body, is sitting next to Morrison. I go over and I say, "Morrison, I'm not going to put him down." What? You're not going to put him on? What are you talking about? I said, "Trust me, Morrison. I know what I'm talking about. I really know what I'm talking about. I'm not putting him on." Go up and make my Rule 29A motion. Denied. Put on your first witness. Oh, shit. And I can feel Henry B. I look around Henry B.'s head. By this time, it's blown up. You know how they do those ads. It's like twice as big as it was before. They're both glowering at me. We win the case, and I'm walking home. It's only 2 or 3 blocks from the federal courthouse. Lucius Bunton and his wife in an old Buick, they pull out of the federal building. You want to ride? Yeah. Still pissed off. And I said, Jack, why'd you do that? He said, oh, I knew they'd do the right thing. I said, well, if they hadn't, would you? And sail where his drives right about, drops me off. You know, never says another thing. It was fun. You know, there were so many lawyers. Most of them were with every day. It's a fun group. It's people that actually give a damn about constitutional rights and don't just talk about them. Actually stand up and fight for them. And you know, I still, you know, most of them are harder on their friends than they are their enemies. Warren Burnett was a classic example. Trying a case with Warren was always enlightening, and it was, you know, he was like, I'm a little Jewish kid in San Antonio, and I'd turn on Sunday morning, I'd listen to some of these preachers, and they really were good. You know, it wasn't like I agreed with them about anything, I just liked listening to them. They had good bullshit. Warren was one of those kind of people that could talk to you about anything. He was mesmerized. There's a wonderful story about Warren. He used understatement. You know, I tend to get preachy and yell at people and, you know, scream and, you know. Warren always was understated. He never took a note. He sat there quiet. He always had a way of kind of talking with his hands, like begging people for shit. And there's a wonderful story is one of his wives, Emma, who's known as a Whittaker down here in town. Apparently they'd had a terrible fight and stuff's crashing off the walls and doors slamming. Finally she goes out, throws up the garage door, gets in her Suburban, just got a new Porsche, bangs in the Porsche, she's sitting there, banging out the street. And Warren came to the screen door with a drink, as he often did. And he says, now, Miss Emma, play fair, play fair. He had that ability to bring a sense of humor and a commonality that everyone was able to understand the points he was making. And part of what we do is to, someone said, why do they call it? I taught a course at UT called Defensive Complex Criminal Cases, and one of the other professors, George Dixie, probably knows. Well, I know what Goldstein does. He takes something very simple and makes it complicated. But I think it's just the opposite. I think what our job is to take, no matter how complicated the case, and it gets tougher and tougher as we get deeper and deeper into these paper-intensive white-collar cases, is to take something that's complex and distill it down to something that everybody understands.
Otherwise, the zero is going to be.
No question about that. And often they do in spite of, even if we are good.
3 years ago, you were inducted into the Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Association Hall of Fame. And it was an honor not only for you as your work, your life's work in criminal defense, but also the contributions you made both to the Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Association and the National Association. Why don't you tell us a little bit how you felt that day?
Humbled, proud, but I think most of us feel like much of what we accomplished, we like to think we worked really hard when we started, but I've been very fortunate. I have to admit that most of the things that have come my way it's inexplicable to me, how or why. And Doug Tinker, who was inducted on the same day with me, was one of my closest friends. We go back a long way. We were both giving speeches for local ACLUs in South Texas back in the early 70s when we started this journey together. It was an honor not only to be among my brothers and sisters not enough sisters, who I think have been recognized, but a contemporary like Douglas was an honor. Ray Source was there, who once told me, he said that, I asked him if he could help me, he said, well, that fee isn't enough to get me to the dance, but I'm not sure I can keep time to the music. You know, it was terribly flattering. You know, you work hard, but to be recognized by your peers, to be particularly, you know, I took it a little bit as a you know, as they put you out to pasture, they pat you on the back and say something nice about you, but I mean, at least I was alive, you know. You know, I got to enjoy it. I mean, you know.
As Tim Evans asked me to do when I introduced him, is to let everybody know you're still practicing law.
Yeah, exactly. You know, they say, you know, it's not over with yet. Even when you think about Knox Jones, who was also inducted that time, you know, some of our, you know, they were characters. There was, you know, you couldn't wait to see what was going to happen next in the courtroom. I mean, you know, you know, even when it was bad, it was good. You know, it's I'm not sure we're losing them. Maybe they're cropping up in different colors, and maybe we're too old to understand it. But I had a giddy sense when I went to the courtroom. It was always fun, and the crooks we represented were fun. You know, things changed. You know, the hippies, the Vietnam veterans that were flying loads of marijuana in turned into car thieves. You know, not that they turned into car thieves, but you know, we had a national drug policy that managed to bump up the price of marijuana, and where nobody could get it. The only thing you could afford would be crack cocaine. There was a time when powdered cocaine was so expensive. The only people who could afford it were rich people and drug people. Nobody gave a shit. You know, they didn't need it. Now, if a kid wants to buy drugs, he's going to get OxyContin out of his parents' cabinet, or he's going to have, if he has $25, you can't buy marijuana for that. He's going to buy crack cocaine. We've turned the system on its head, and I think a lot of us actually cared about how the system worked. We actually fought not just for our clients, but to help the system out. TCLA spends a great deal of its time and resources and person power on changing the law, in bettering the criminal justice system. And the criminal justice system and the law are better because of that.
I joined TCDLA in 1974, and shortly after I joined, within the first year or so, I went to my first board meeting after a seminar, and observed the one thing that always stuck out to me on this particular board meeting. There was a young kid at that board meeting with kind of a Jewish afro. I remember him well, and he was making the point, and I think every other member of the board of directors was trying to shut him down, but this kid wasn't going to retire from the boardroom until he had made his point. And that always stuck out in my mind. What are your earliest memories? I mean, you were there pretty close right after the inception of the Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Association. What are the things what are your memories?
That's very flattering, what you think. What I remember was being around people that I had a constant respect for. You know, they were, and in those days, there wasn't a whole lot of discussion about money, about where we were going to have the next meeting. It was a substantive discussion, and it was a free-for-all, and there were serious differences. And probably, you know, the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, when I first came into this, was a teeny little organization. The TCLA was a lot bigger than the National Association, and in fact spawned it. The college was at Bates School of Law, whatever it is, at the University of Houston. It was happening in Texas. And, you know, Texas has an abundance of talent. I mean, I go all over the country these days, and I can tell you that there is no bigger or better repository of citizens advocates than our brothers and sisters in the criminal defense bar in Texas. They are marvelous, and this was the best and the brightest. And you know, it was that also. It was flattering for me just to be sitting at the table and having a real round table of thoughtful, intellectual, heartfelt discussion about things that matter not just to us, but to the public and the citizens at large. You know, and I still remember Scrappy Holmes was a municipal judge, and he hired me to sue the I think it was a Kilgore municipality, and I remember sitting in the civil case. We had depositions, the civil rights suit, and there was a pecan, you know, not a pecan, but a can of peas empty can of peas that was, about that high in the middle of the thing. And I noticed nobody got their papers near that. And I didn't pay any attention up there, and all of a sudden, I saw people kind of spitting at it. All of a sudden, I noticed that all the top of all my pleadings had this little brown stain around me, as they kind of splash over into it. And, it was East Texas, and it was, which reminded me, I tell you one thing, the scrappy, it was, these are people that, you all lived together, you didn't have, where are you going to stay? You stayed with him and his son Jude. And he didn't have a can around or anything. And I remember waking up one morning and I had this dream about this seaweed that I got my hand had gotten caught in. I was drowning, and I wake up and the kid would spit his chew off into the space between the bed and the wall, and there was a big pile, and I stuck my hand in his chewing tobacco, spit out chewing tobacco. You go around, for days I was washing my hands and but it was, we end up in Tyler representing these twins. I never forget, they went and got some former CIA guys that had this voice spectrography, because you couldn't tell which twin was on the tape. It was a delivery of 9 kilos of cocaine. And they were football stars. So they brought in these experts to tell which twin it was. We had an expert saying that they're identical twins. You can't tell the difference. But to get to the trial, it took 2 years, and the judge kept trying. We had giant jury panels, and we never were able to get a jury. So they moved it from Tyler, it's about 15% African American, 20%, to Canton, Texas. Canton, Texas, the janitors are white. There are no black people. They used to have a big a sign on their water tower, the blackest soil and the whitest citizens in Texas. It was an amazing trip, and to be with these, we rented a storefront office because it took us months to try this thing. And it was a fascinating trial because the judge got mad about us asking all these questions about racism in the community. He said, no more of that. And this one woman, he said, are there any other questions from the jurors? One woman got up and said, yes, Your Honor. He said, well, I'm the preacher's wife in this town, and I'm shocked at these people. They're lying. I heard them out there, and she starts calling people out that had been in the White Citizens Council about what they had said about these people. And you just felt it. And the court reporter, for years after the King William Festival in our little community during Fiesta, his court reporter every year would bring her RV and her husband and her family. They'd come down, and everybody became family. You were family not just with your clients, but with the personnel, with the jury. We're halfway through the trial, and I can tell you how long ago it was. 18 years this month, because Matthew was born. So remember the judge, it was Juneteenth, the judge said, do you think we ought to have a holiday? He'd been such a racist the whole time. I said, no, why don't we just back a truck of watermelons up here and we can all, enjoy it. Anyway, so we're right in the middle of the DEA agent. It was a state case, but a DEA agent, they came and he had his flak jacket on with all his helmet and everything. He was explaining about how dangerous these guys were. The judge said, just a moment. I'd like to take a little time out here. We're going to retire. The counsel will join me in the jury. We're going to retire to the jury room, and we're going to have a birthday party for our bailiff, who's, I guess they didn't have a retirement requirement. It must have been 87. God forbid he should pull his weapon out. Anyway, so we go, and there's this table. It's got the paper tablecloth, a plastic punch bowl. We're all sitting there, and this agent sitting there with the armor and the helmet and everything. And one of the jurors says, well, this isn't fair. And by the way, 9 black defendants in Canton. And every morning there were fresh Confederate little flags stuck in the lawn at the courthouse. And the one of the jurors said, it's not fair that the defendants are sitting out here. So this guy with, helmet on, and flak jacket, all 9 defendants pile into this crowded little jury room where we're singing happy birthday and having punch and cookies with the jury. So I knew that was a good time.
Yes. You were president of the Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Association during the legislative year. What are your memories of the year of your presidency?
What the old joke was that the legislature, now, they have special sessions, but they only meet every other year by plan that gives citizens at least 1 year to recover from whatever dastardly things they were doing. I don't know if you've seen the movie about Charlie Wilson's War. Well, Charlie Wilson was, in Congress at the time. The state legislature had that same dichotomy. You had these interesting characters who were, ranged in political strife from the Craig Washingtons to the right-wing conservatives. But Texas, predominantly has a very conservative streak. We were constantly fighting about things like attorney-client privilege I know during your year we, decided to redraft the entire punishment scheme in Texas, which, by the way, might have been one of the more enlightened, for some reason. I mean, who knows? We're going to talk about that later, but I think it's terribly important that TCDLA played a very strategic and important role in shaping that. Had it not been for the organizational strength, I don't think a few defense lawyers in the state bar, those committees are like watching paint dry. You can just go to sleep anytime, but these were not. These were active lawyers pushing an agenda. And as a consequence, Texas has a much more enlightened view of punishment, same except our desire to kill people. Much more enlightened point of view than most other jurisdictions, including the federal jurisdiction. And, every once in a while, we resurrect this idea about a guideline, but we eschewed that. We rejected that in favor of something very positive. I can only say that we were becoming more and more active in terms of attempting as best we could to bring some civility to the criminal justice system and to the practice of law and the attorney-client privilege, particularly the right to retain and consult with counsel without fear that very factor could be used against you is important.
As a matter of fact, because I remember it distinctly, I think it's 38.38 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. There's no doubt in my mind. There's no doubt in my mind is your baby that you ushered, that you conceived and ushered all the way through the legislative session, and it is one that all the practitioners in criminal defense law still get the benefit of it today.
Thank you for remembering that. Yeah. But it was fun because if you remember the Surgeon General, this is how young or old we are, had come out with the cigarette pack warning, Surgeon General's warning, cigarettes. And I still remember I was so angry at some of these cases where they were subpoenaing lawyers to testify about their clients, their identity, who paid them, that in the Fifth Circuit, I had this big mock-up of it. It said Attorney General's warning, hiring and consulting with a lawyer can and will be used against you in a court of law. We litigated that as well as the legislative issues.
In addition to all of the great cases and appeals you've had, there is no doubt one of the legacies, I believe, of the Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Association, the National Association, and one of the great legacies that you bring to the table is that continuing legal education for the criminal defense practitioner kind of got started there in the early 70s, just before specialization came in 75, and you've always been at the forefront of that aspect of it also. Tell me a little bit about how do you remember the first time that you taught a group of lawyers about the law?
I do. It was, I would guess, 1974 or 75. Texas was just coming into the fold, but the federal rules of evidence came into play. And in 74, they were just starting to formulate them. And I was at the college as a student learning and doing some instruction, but I remember I was fascinated with the idea. Taking evidence and procedure in law school was so foreign to most of us because we'd never seen a courtroom. We didn't know how it operated. It's like getting a doctor, never seen a cadaver. At least they got a dentist. They cut up. We never. Nobody had ever taken us. They didn't have any mock courtrooms. They had moot court, which was they appealed the case because they knew you were going to fucking lose your first case. So you better know how to appeal it. There was nobody. They didn't teach you a thing about trying a case. So the idea of learning the rules of evidence without being in a courtroom, well, what I noticed when I first got into practice was I didn't have a clue. That's why trying conscientious objector cases with Maury were so important, because they were both criminal and civil cases where you were filing writs of habeas corpus, but all in the criminal context. But, it wasn't a whole lot of cross-examination. Did he raise his right hand? No. Did he cross the yellow line? No. Case closed, bang, It was all research. And I still remember Michael Tiger, a wonderful lawyer, and still probably as good as they come, they began a publication called the Selective Service Law Report, and it was actually a mimeograph at first. You could smell the pages. And we were
getting... There's good reason for that, too.
Yeah, I spent a lot of nights smelling the pages. I can't read this shit, but I can sure get... Anyway, we would have opinions. In those days, there was no mechanism, no electronic age, so we had opinions long before the U.S. attorneys had them. And because we would send them out in networking. And finally, and I was on his board, finally the way we made money was every U.S. attorney's office in the country bought a copy of the multi-volume growing Selective Service Law Report. I still remember spending hours, tab A and the slot B, putting the thing together. And that was as much fun as anything because, it didn't take a rocket, so it was like fixing your bicycle, stay in a car engine, just put it together. But it was, you were able to try the case simply because it was mainly lawyering and intellectually dealing with case law and the rule. And so I was able to be spoon-fed into a criminal justice system and the adversary system, trials of cases where somebody's life and liberty are at stake, slower than just being dropped in the deep end. And CLE was terribly important to me because it gave me the opportunity to get a running start, to learn. And they started making sense to me because, it was life and death. It was win or lose. And it became clear to me that what we were building in the procedural rules and the rules of evidence are roadmaps. And I soon learned that, if you knew 3 rules, you basically knew 2 more than anybody else in the courtroom other than the bailiff, certainly more than the judge. And if you just knew the numbers, you were ahead of the game. And, they're fairly easy to spout out, espouse. They're just difficult to apply. And that's where the rubber meets the road, and it was fun. I loved the teaching and learning aspects of all of that because it gave you a chance in it was contrived a little bit, but a less intense atmosphere where people's liberty wasn't at stake. You had a chance to absorb, to think, to reflect, and to understand the rules. And I don't think there's a single more important thing that TCLA does than its continuing legal education. And those courses started in this state. We can take a great deal of pride that those programs that you see mimicked across this country had their origins. The font was right here in Texas with wonderful lawyers at the college and within TCDLA and its membership. And, often I've heard you explain to people, don't sit around waiting for somebody to ask you. It's a volunteer group. And, I took you at your word. I think, I volunteered, and it's a wonderful opportunity. I think most occasions that you teach at CLE, you learn more in that process than any of the students do.
Less than a year after you were president of the Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Association, you became president of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. Tell us a little bit about the differences, if any.
Teaching you how much bad taste teaching at ACDO.
It just kind of spread. Yeah.
Then the question was?
What kind of, were there any differences? Did you experience any differences in the management of the two organizations or the goals during your presidency?
Well, you got to remember that the first thing that I got to do as president of that organization was fire my ex-law partner. So there were a lot of differences. I'd have to say that there's a lot of commonality. I think the lawyers that stand up and protect citizens' rights across this country have a common thread of decency, of humanity, of a desire and willingness to place themselves in harm's way in order to protect liberty. I think most of them believe that the constitutional doctrines were developed with a keen sense of preserving personal freedom, and I think lawyers across this country share that religious advocacy. I will say that if I had to pick a difference, is that as any group grows in size and geography, you lose a little bit of the collegiality. I don't know if it's just we're all Texans, or whether it's simply the difference in one state, which is a pretty large state, and a national organization. But you can get lost in the morass of any CDO. I still think, and maybe I'm old and naive, but I still think of, the Texas Association as a group of fellow travelers, friends. It's a family. And you lose some of that when you spread it out across this country.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's my turn.